For this franchise, Resident Evil 4 is simply the gift that keeps on giving. The original game was a highly ambitious project that reached for the... well, take it away, Nemesis.
Stars.
Thank you very much, Nemesis. I agree. Those were some truly moving words. The original game was an ambitious project that reached for the stars. It's a game that went through so many iterations and different ideas that some of them even ended up becoming other successful franchises altogether, spawning classics like the Devil May Cry franchise and a little horror gem called Haunting Ground. Even Resident Evil 2 Remake takes ideas from the cancelled prototypes of Resident Evil 4. The final product turned out to be one of the best games of all time and is still considered by many to be the best survival horror game ever made, and that a remake of this game can simply never live up to the original, which is why it is heavily rumored that the remake will actually change quite a few things around, including the characters. There have been some rumors and leaks over the past few months speculating that a fan-favorite protagonist, Claire Redfield, is making an appearance in the rumored upcoming Resident Evil 4 remake, and that the storyline will be reworked to tie in with the Netflix quote-unquote series, Infinite Darkness. Personally, I didn't enjoy the movie at all, and I don't know how I feel about this rumor if it ends up true. There's no evidence to prove it yet, this is all just speculation and should be taken with a grain of salt, but let's discuss it anyway. If this turns out to be true, what does this mean for Resident Evil 4? And even more importantly, what does this mean for Code Veronica? I mean, if you think about it, Code Veronica has a lot of characteristics that overlap with Resident Evil 4, and given there's a chance that Claire Redfield, who has no ties to the original Resident Evil 4 in any way whatsoever, is rumored to still be in the game, it just begs the question, will Code Veronica take place during Resident Evil 4? If there is one thing I'm sure most of us can agree on about Code Veronica, judging from the poll I posted, is that it does deserve a remake, for one reason or another. I'm currently working on a review for that one, so while you're at it, consider subscribing and hit the bell so you will be notified when it's finally uploaded. Hit the like button too to help support the channel and getting the videos out there for others to see. Code Veronica has its fans, no doubt about that. Just to give a small idea of how I feel about the game, I think Code Veronica's just fine. It didn't click with me the first 2 times I finished it, let me tell you that, but recently it has been growing on me and the game has a lot of things that are worth praising. It really is a good classic Resident Evil game, despite being easily the most flawed one. I think the biggest problem with the game is that it tried to do too much, so much so that it forgot how to ease people into having an enjoyable experience first and foremost. Code Veronica has pretty much the weirdest difficulty and learning curve out of any Resident Evil game, and in a world where Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 6 exist, that's really saying something. It's really easy to see why RECVX would be completely skipped from the studio's point of view. The cold hard truth is that despite how some people love to shout out for the top of the mountains about how it's secretly the best game in the franchise, the sale and mixed reception of that game doesn't reflect it one bit. But there could be a loophole here. The way I see it, and probably lots of other fans might see it this way too, the best way to sell Code Veronica these days is to just make it part of Resident Evil 4. See, Resident Evil 4 is a completely different story both critically and financially. You could literally sell a box with a fart in it and call it Resident Evil 4 and it would still sell like pastizzi in Malta. People rush out to buy every port and remaster of this game like a mob of crazy villagers rushing out to buy the next annual smartphone iteration on Black Friday. Think of it how like Resident Evil Resistance was bundled with Resident Evil 3 Remake to help it reach a wider audience. It probably would have tanked even harder if it wasn't bundled in with that game. Code Veronica Remake could theoretically get greenlit as a project worth developing if it gets to share a huge spotlight with Resident Evil 4. To strengthen that argument, there are other things to consider as well. For starters, there's the fact that Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4 share a staggering amount of conceptual similarities. They both take place on an island with a prison, they both have creepy royal family of villains living in a secluded location like a palace or a castle. And in both of these games, these villains are so overly silly and dramatic and will have you rolling your eyes with every word that comes out of their mouth. Also, this one just needs to be said, as much as Code Veronica fans hate to admit this, both games have a serious proclivity for action set pieces. One other thing to consider here is that the role of Steve Burnside was originally planned for Leon Kennedy, including dying later on in the game, but due to possible backlash, Leon was pulled out of the story and substituted with the new character who was Steve. The big issue here with putting Code Veronica in Resident Evil 4's timeline is that Code Veronica just took place a few months after Resident Evil 2. This is completely subjective, but the way I see it, I'd be totally fine with it getting a rework in the story and the timeline than to have it get no remake whatsoever. With so many ideas crossing over between both games, it could just mix and match parts of both stories and fuse them into one game. After all, Resident Evil 3 Remake did have the Nemesis implanting the Anti-Alpha parasite into the T-Virus zombies with the intent of tying the parasite to the Resident Evil 4 Remake. And since the T-Veronica virus is also a strain of the T-Virus, well, if Resident Evil 4 Remake does actually end up merging itself with Code Veronica's storyline, it wouldn't really be a stretch to think that all three of these will be treated as one and the same. This seems like a very promising concept, but it does have to be said, there's a ton of stuff that could go wrong here. However, as a Resident Evil fan, I'm always looking forward as to what the series tries out next, even if for the time being, the series does feel like it is at a creative plateau. And with that, the Raven draws to a conclusion. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.